elsewhere in the forum. If you're all set up, my name is Vincent Boulanger. I'm in charge of the EnerGaïa conferences for the last 10 years. And we're now going to talk about the connection. Because as you probably noticed during the first roundtable, we need an acceleration of renewables. All of this is not going to happen without the cables that go with it. So we're going to ask the question to our speakers of today: how can we accelerate the connection? Because accelerating renewables will not happen without them. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'm going to stand in the middle of them. I'm happy to sit here. So I will start with the extreme left for me, the extreme right for you. Michel GIORIA, your General Delegate of France Renouvelables. Hello. Hervé LEXTRAIT, next to you, is the Director of the Energy Transition Hub of ENEDIS. There's a technical issue.
Est-ce que le son... Alors, on a un petit problème de boîtier, vous pouvez changer?
So, we need a new headset, probably, for this gentleman.
Excusez-nous,
apologies for this technical incident. This is a new thing. This is a new technique that we're using now. So, next to me, to my left, Rachid OTMANI, who's the Vice Director of the Client Hub for RTE. On the other side, we have Victor DANEL, who's the Engineering Director of Procurement, Engineering, Procurement and Construction by BAYWA RE. This, how do we pronounce the name of the company? BAYWA RE. And finally, Julien ISAMBERT, founder of the company of infrastructure connection and energy storage called ACACIA. My first question is for you, Mr. LEXTRAIT. No, you still don't hear. Okay.
Je vais pendant ce temps-là demander à notre ami de la technique de
ask our technical friend to upload my PowerPoint. Can you please check on that? Because I would like to show a presentation in the Helios room. Can you hear me now in the meantime? Okay, perfect. We've solved that one. So the first question was for you, because ENEDIS, you're often at the forefront to connect renewables. And I wanted to explain to everyone, hoping we get that PowerPoint presentation soon, on what we will be discussing over the next hour and a half. When does your work start, and when does the job of Mr. OTMANI start? What is your share of, what is your part of the job? Because we have here a distribution network and a transport network. So first of all, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today. What we need to say first before we talked about the distribution network is there's only one electricity grid, and within this grid there are networks and there's some highways which are for transport, and there's some national roads, smaller roads, that is the distribution network. So that the specificity of this distribution network is it's given to it's the authorities that organize the distribution network that give it to ENEDIS to manage. And ENEDIS means 95% of the territory. 5% of the territory is managed by other distribution network managers. So the numbers that I'm going to give you are not the numbers for France, but represent a very, very big part of the country. So the connection of renewables is done on distribution networks. We have 95% of the installations that are connected, and it's 95% that are connected to this distribution network. The transport network is Mr. OTMANI, and these are the highways, right? So the connection between the highways and the national roads are the source posts. You have it in, you see it in on the slide. These are big stations with big transformators, converters, that they transform the tension, different levels of tension for HTB and HTA. So it's usually 20 kilovolts. So we have 2,300 of those in France, in the country, and we built more and more for renewables because renewables are developed in places where not necessarily consumption and not necessarily those stations. So the challenge of the decade is to build more of those stations and to connect them to the transport network, so all these renewables can be served by the transport network and be serving consumers everywhere in the country. So we're talking about these stations, whether we talk about the connections to the distribution network or to the transport network. What we call these stations are the property of ENEDIS, and they are the interface between transport and distribution. Uphill you have RTE, my colleague Rachid, and downstream you have all the network that is given by the local authorities, 20 kilovolts as an average tension, going from those stations. So we call them stations. We could be some private stations that are connected as well, but that's a different story. Mr. OTMANI, do you want to say a word on this presentation? I clicked on the wrong button. Can you please show the presentation? Yes, I'd like to say a few words. Hello, and I'm very happy to be with you. Before we talk about infrastructure, we have specific roles. We are the guarantors of the ecosystem. Can you explain what you mean? It means that any time the balance between production and consumption is happening, so we avoid any kind of imbalance on the network and stoppage or instability. So it's a very important element. It's a role that was given to us, and many of our teams work on it to make sure that at any given time you have energy in quality and in quality and quantity. We also guarantee the access to the market and also the energy at the interconnection. So this is really part of the electricity grid, and that RT is at the forefront. Then we also have the infrastructure and connection for the clients. If we talk about renewables, we're 20% approximately in power, in terms of power, with bars of 100 to 200 megawatts. We also connect the stations, whether they're the stations managing the distribution network or the private stations. And also, since it is all about bringing energy to the consumers, we also build the infrastructure so we can transport the energy to the consumers. We're missing an element on the scheme, which is the delivery station. So what is a delivery station? This is the element between the production unit of renewables. We could have an electricity station next to the wind farm. So, for example, the pole, you can see next to this pole, there's a hub. We can send it to the substation, the delivery substation. Do we have pretty much the basis, or does somebody want to add something? We're going to move on to the next question. Where are we at in terms of connection? We know that every trimester the state departments publish a dashboard, and we know that we have more and more requests. Where are we at? Is it going smoothly? So we do our best so it's as smooth as possible. I'd like to go back on the word that we used. We talk about queue, waiting line. This is the word that is used in our regulation. Why do we talk about the queue? Is that it's a key moment when we need to organize the projects in a very rigorous manner. It's the demand for connection. That's why there's a queue, because the projects come one after the other. And why is it so important? Because the connection offer depends on the place where which you have in the queue. Once the connection request is made, they're not waiting one after the other. They're all conducted on the parallel at the same time. There's not real queue to begin to talk about, but for the last 2 or 3 years, the volume of projects in development have increased. So particularly thanks to the development and the growth of photovoltaic in France. So what we can see at ENEDIS is when we connect, we install those projects that are being developed. And there's some figures that are unusual on our distribution networks. And that you remember, if you remember the moratorium of photovoltaic, before that, we were under what we can see today, what we experience today. So if I look at the numbers of the last 12 months, we have gone over the 4 gigawatts of renewables on the network that is given to ENEDIS. So we'll wait to see until the year is. We're talking about PVs, right? No, we're talking about wind as well. Wind energy is not exploding, but it's being connected in a pretty constant way. So the PV energy is really growing in a much faster way. We're going to go over 200 connections by the end of the year. And by next year, we will have gone over 1 million producers of PVs in France. So these numbers are quite significant. If I dive deeper into what happened 5 years ago, we had less than 20,000 connections per year. We're over 200,000, connections per year. So we've doubled by 10 the number of connections to the public grid. Is it small or big installations? There's small, mostly. Either we talk about the number of collections, or we talk about the power, and it will have a big impact on the big installations. And what is really interesting to see is the power of the small installations has taken a lot of space, because a lot of PV is actually driven by what is done in low tension, so it's for small installations. So if we look ahead, it could even represent half of what is being connected in renewables on the distribution network. So it's quite important. Michel GIORIA, for the professionals, France Renouvelables, how do you take stock of the situation? Is it good? Is it satisfying, the connection of renewables? We work, of course, on the similar numbers than the one that Hervé gave us. And what we can see at our level, it's the same trend. 3 years ago, we would connect to the grid 2 gigawatt per year, and today we're looking at something that is around 4 gigawatts, and that is going to go over. So the numbers are clear. There's a trend, there's an acceleration trend of connection of renewables on the grid, particularly the distribution grid network. However, we have 2 challenges ahead of us. The first challenge is we're going to have to, this trend is an acceleration, and it's something that is going to last and plateau for the next 15 years. If we are looking at what the scenarios produced by RT and the French strategy for the climate energy. So beyond managing this acceleration going from 2 to 4 gigawatts with all the transformation of all the actors that are in place, we need to find an organization, an industrial organization, and a regulation method so we can stay on this plateau that we're going to place at about 5 to 6 gigawatts for the next 15 years. This is a collective challenge from the side of the producers as well as from the network. A second challenge is that is major is that what Hervé mentioned early on is the question of the making the queue reliable. I think we went from 10 to 15 gigawatts. But what matters in this queue is to know exactly where we're at, where are the projects, and so this queue is as reliable as possible. We have a lot of work to do with RT, with the platforms of declarations and all that. And this work has to be continued because from where we're standing, it's just one of the blocks of this collective transformation. So we can stay in this plateau at around 5 to 6 gigawatts per year for the next 10 to 15 years. On the developer side, how do you experience it? Are your projects in a flow of connections? Yes. I would like to thank you for all the organizer of EnerGaïa for this forum. And we're going to bring you some elements for the network, for the renewables. The developers BAYWA were present in most countries in the world, particularly Europe. But in France, we exploit a gigawatt. And to give you some context on the connection deadlines, we've built 200 mega of wind and PVs over the last years. And what we could tell is that up until 2012 and 2013, it would take us a few years to obtain a connection. However, certain projects had to be dropped because the connection had to finance some structuring work, such as mutations of transformators. So the Federation of Producers and Network agreed, and it was necessary to put in place some schemes, some planning, regional schemes, the famous S3Rs that we're going to talk to, which is a regional scheme of connection, the acronym. So we, between the getting into the queue and the commissioning, which is when we can actually inject electricity on the grid, this is a delay of about 3 years. It worked well until 2020, when the first schemes were finalized, and we had to revise them. And it's at that time that we identified some works to be done on transport, and we had some technical propositions with the deadlines of 7 to 8 years. So we started to see that happening, and we can really wonder now: are there what's going to happen with the planning? And so we need to work on that to see what solutions we can bring to develop the network, and so this network can host our renewables project. Julien ISAMBERT, your job is to build infrastructure. So how do you assess these blocking points for the connection? Thank you for giving me the floor. On top of ACACIA, I'm also the founder of an engineering study in engineering to support the connection to the public grid of the renewables in France. And if we were to identify today a few blocking points or challenges that are ahead of us, as Hervé and Michel said, we are in a situation where there's a significant increase of requests for connection and development projects for renewables. And we go from a grid that is historically built in a centralized way to take the energy from the major means of production to the consumers to go through the highways and infrastructure that were made a certain way, whereas the insertion of renewables and the energy transition gives us the need to modify this network to find some sources of renewable energies in rural areas, which is not the way the original network was built. So there's a transformation that has to happen, and that leads to some needs in human resources, because each of us, each company working in renewables, can see that there's a need for manpower on a daily basis. So there's also going to be a need for financing. They're going to present themselves at the European Commission a week ago. It was mentioned an investment plan for 500 million euros for Europe. So if we only talk about France, the challenge is quite big. And in practice, we can see that, as Victor said, the deadlines increase, because also obtaining the authorization and the consultation and the development of infrastructures, of networks, take a long time for many different reasons. And in practice, it was we studied the fact that these development times would represent 80% of next 5, 7, 8 years for the new connections to be available, versus 10% of the costs to build those infrastructures. So to simplify these authorizations would be a major lever to accelerate this. We're going to go back to that, and we're going to go back to all the points that you mentioned, and how can the network manager need to do, and what they need to improve and slow down the deadline for consensus. Are we all agreeing on that?
Je pense, enfin, il y a énormément de sujets qui ont été abordés par les différents
I would like to go back on a few points. Michel said it. For 10 years, we connected 2.5 gigawatts per year, and now we're really stepping up. We're at 4.5. So we should greet this and welcome this new trend. So I would like to remain positive. But our real challenge is that the forecast, the SPEC, which is the French strategy for the climate, another acronym, imply that we're going to need to accelerate. So the trajectory that is dictated by the government shows us that we need to accelerate even more the insertion of renewables to succeed in our energy transition. Can you remind me the goals of the government, or you want to do that yourself?
According to the RT documents, we need to double our production compared to what we're doing right now. For the ground-based turbines, 1.5 gigawatts per year. But for the offshore wind turbine, this is a huge industrial scale. We're moving from 1 gigawatts, which is the current rate, to 18 gigawatts in 2035. So there are going to be massive operations going on, but I just wanted everybody to have the right figures. When we talk about acceleration, perhaps people haven't all necessarily read the strategy plan. This is what we're based on: 7 gigawatts for PV, and so we're going to be having more installations. So the first note is that we are accelerating the energies, which is a good thing. I'd also like to talk about this notion of a queue, a waiting line. It's badly named because on the transport side we have a very important subject, which is the level of maturity. And like what's said in relation to the accompanying demand with a building permit, we we do have the possibility of connecting on the transport side, which is going to have an effect on access to capacity. Last year, we discussed with the professional syndicates and the other stakeholders to have a priority access to the most mature projects, to being able to supply the necessary documents, meaning that we would avoid having big projects that arrive in 10 or 15 years' time with going up to 300 megawatts. This takes time. It's necessary to get the most mature projects, the quickest project up and running. So there was a kind of filtering process saying the smallest ones are the first to get through. This made it possible to accelerate access for the most mature. What do you mean by a mature project? We have projects on paper. We have projects around 300, 400 megawatts which didn't get authorization and didn't have any secured land rights. So we were looking at prospection, but with access to capacity, it's a commodity which is somewhat rare. And so we had people who preempted the capacity. It's a bit like first come, first serve. If they had a 300 megawatt project which arrived in 2020, arrives in 2028, the little one will go forth first. But the problems with this, if the smaller one goes first, is that we're not going to be able to juggle the rules for the transition process. We looked on the authorization side, which is an important aspect, hence the RPT proof, where there has to be RPT is a public transport network, sorry. I'm sorry about acronyms, because we have translators here who are doing simultaneous translation, and if you give them acronyms which are French, it's going to be difficult for them to be able to find the right. Thank you. So, as I was saying, the objective really was that every year we ask the project leaders to set up their project according to the rules, the proof and the authorization. If the project isn't mature, they will have to leave the list. The waiting list. In terms of planning, because this was also approached, I think we have to remember that as of the moment when we have our first schema diagrams, we were able to benefit from the existing infrastructure. There was an infrastructure which already existed, and we were able to connect. The collective issue here, and the challenge, is to be able to transform the infrastructure. On the transport side, this is clear. We said that anticipation is absolutely vital in this process. We can't build a project quickly. We need 3 or 4 years to do so. In terms of tension, this can vary between 3 and 8 years for 60 to 80 kilometers for connection means that we have to get grants, we have to listen to the needs of local authorities. 80%, this is the phase which takes the longest. But it's knowing that it's impossible to access as quickly as nowadays for PV projects. On the RTE side, the transport side, we really emphasize the importance to anticipate. There has to be transparency on the part of the players, and we ask the producers to play the game, to provide information about their forecast supply, to be able to anticipate the infrastructure. On the other hand, if people intend to install, we set up the necessary infrastructure to help them to connect. This is the spirit in which we're working in the transport network system, to be able to anticipate the electrical infrastructure, to be able to connect the energy. Michel GIORIA, are you ready to play the game of transparency on the professional level? And I would like to ask another question. In terms of what's been said by the people on my right, can we avoid bottlenecks? Is the network a bottleneck in terms of renewable projects, or would that be exaggerating? There are 2 questions, 2 answers. So the first one in relation to whether professionals are ready to play the game. But apart from the fact that they're ready to play the game, we, in the case of the acceleration of renewables, we were very much a driving force in this process, with a need to anticipate. The investment studies were carried out to answer the issue raised by Victor. In some places, it was there may have been horizons at 2028. This is not always the case, but it's thanks to anticipation and the proper explanation of the process that this is made possible. It means that it makes it necessary for all the actors to be part of this anticipation process. We were drivers in this area, as I said, and in this movement, it's important in the context of the STDR review, acronyms, the network development scheme around 2024. RT is working on this. And with this system, we were able to look at the evolution of the regulatory framework, thanks to anticipation, both in terms of the studies and investments. This is a point which is really essential, and we have to succeed in this, because in 2018, I think there were various working groups that were steered by our organization on the subject of anticipation, and we didn't go right to the end because the regulatory framework hadn't changed. So the regulatory framework related to the 10-year scheme can make it possible to have the necessary economic basis for financing and investment. In terms of the bottleneck situation, from my standpoint, in France today, this is not the case. It's clear. We can see in our country where this might be the case, particularly what's happening in Germany, for instance, where we're seeing connections, but where the network is saturated. So this has created a whole series of problems, and we may find ourselves in this kind of situation, particularly in Greece. Today, this is not a problem. There's not a bottleneck in France, but if we understand the current situation, we do think that what we're talking about today, we do think that this could happen around 2030, but with the notion of acceleration, we are going to have to be able to anticipate this kind of situation. And as of now, we have to be able to make the supply and the portfolios reliable. And secondly, we have to have the right kind of regulatory system that we're able to anticipate the program, so that over the next 10 years, we don't have to, we don't face problems with bottlenecks on the network. If I'd like to add another layer here, does this mean that the regional schemes for connection up to now weren't very ambitious, and so they need a kind of accelerator effect for them to be more effective in relation to the new goals? It's true. The ambition of these schemes is a key factor in terms of acceleration. The schemes these are decided on a regional basis, and so these may vary depending on the situation of the different territories and the choices that are made by the prefect, the head of the region. Okay, I'm just going to stop you here for a second to underline the importance of these schemes for you. Are these your roadmap? It's our tool for planning the network, which we share with other networks, which we share with the producers. Hence, the importance of this reliability in terms of the hypotheses that we can put forward to build together. And I totally agree with what's been said by my colleagues here. We've just finished the first generation of schemes over a 10-year period, and we can see that these schemes worked. We connected 25 gigawatts with this. years. We benefited as far as possible from the existing network capacity with quite quickly, because we had space in the substations, and there still is space in the substations. But nevertheless, the energies are concentrated in certain areas. Rachid's were effective. We need to build new stations. When we build new stations, we need new links to the transport networks. There's a whole series of administrative authorization, which is time-consuming. Today, I want to underline the fact that we share everything on a common diagnosis in terms of mutual learning, for example, shared learning on the constraints and difficulties that people might find. We have a common diagnosis, a common goal, i.e. to accelerate. And so we can say that we have a certain number of assets to be able to succeed, to avoid the fact that the network would become a bottleneck, like is the case in Germany, Greece, and the Netherlands as well. We're going to do whatever necessary to make sure that this kind of bottleneck doesn't happen in France. And it's this new scheme with a lot at stake here. But I obviously share 200% of what Rachid said about the importance of anticipation. One little detail which will help us to succeed is that at the moment, the law says that these schemes have to look at a horizon of 10 to 15 years. Previously, it was from a 5 to 10 year period. Now we're looking at 10 to 15, with the idea of building an ambition which matches this time period, means that we can look further towards the future and anticipate works so that it's easier to connect. So this is going to be revised regularly. We're not going to do one for, say, 5 years and then, well, this is one of the debates at the moment. There's a decree which is going to be coming out to talk about the period of these schemes. But if the ambition is sufficiently long-standing, it will make it less important for us to have to revise these time periods in the future. So typically we're looking about small projects. So how do you anticipate the arrival of these small projects? This isn't part of the scheme. Oh, yes. Luckily, they are in this scheme, as we were saying earlier. They represent half the PV power, and in the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be half of renewables power overall. Luckily, they are part of the scheme. So it's very important to be able to anticipate them. And for the little projects, we can see that it might be complicated to do the same, proceed in the same way with a declaration to a platform. No, I didn't tell you that I wanted to put, PV panels on my roof, for instance. So it's important that we're able to provide what's necessary. We have to do things in a different way. At ENEDIS, we've developed a tool with our strategy director to modulate the development of PV, particularly small PV, which at a very small level. So this is going to make it possible. This tool is going to be made available to everybody, to all the local authorities, so that it could be used. If everybody considers that it's showing interesting results, we'll be able to size future schemes accordingly. So on my right, do we have actions or comments on what's been done on regional level for these regional schemes? I also wanted to say that over the last 15 to 20 years, renewables are arriving. There's a huge amount of work that's been done by everybody. So we all agree on this aspect. We've talked a lot about tools, and in fact, the regional connection schemes are a tool which have really worked well, made it possible to unblock situations in a lot of geographical areas over the last 10 to 15 years. The 10-year scheme for the development of tools of networks is on a national level, and there's another tool which is used today for various reasons, i.e., create structures that have a more structuring effect in terms of the transport networks, involve thinking about the use of network 10-year schemes. Because regional schemes have territorial limits or boundaries, and these could be resolved by a national scheme. Victor? Yes, perhaps a more general point here. We are all aware that we have to go towards electrification of the energy uses. So I think that we have to move together on this one, be more ambitious. I'm going to be a little bit make a caricature. We want to build the networks, but we need to be able to develop there's a kind of chicken and egg situation here. We need to know what the network is going to be doing in terms of connections in order to be able to develop the renewables and vice versa. Because already the changes and the learning curves are considerable, and so we have to continue in this learning process. So, Mr. OTMANI, I'm going to ask you a question about means. Do you have everything that you need, or there are a certain number of challenges that need to be picked up to be able to carry out this work of building and strengthening the transport network? I think that we have three main challenges. We have the first topic, which is a real industrial challenge, i.e. we have to be able to develop farms and infrastructures. We're not talking about permits or authorizations. I'm talking about the actual industrial ecosystem which surrounds us. We're finding tension, cables, for example, are posing problems from a procurement point of view. So we have cables are everywhere. It's a worldwide issue, and this is a very important topic that we've been working with ENEDIS on, the European transport networks, to make sure that we can secure the procurement chains, because we have a real issue. It's even more important for very big structures with 400,000 volts, where the decision-making concern the whole of Europe and even beyond, across the Atlantic or even to Japan. And there's a real issue in relation to security. We have to accelerate our schemes, but we also have to be able to manufacture and build and deploy the infrastructures. So this, when you mean you need to be able to store cables? Yes, that's part of it, because industrialists ask us to be able to develop production chains to secure copper, for instance, so that it's available. And this is why this 10-year scheme is so important, because it gives a certain legibility in relation to the structures. And ENEDIS is working on this, on 10-year plans. But this is the first main topic, and this where we have to make sure we have the capacity. The second challenge is more of a human nature, which is in terms of resources. Today, at the RTE transport system, we're taking on. Up to now, we've been up to 400 people, new arrivals recruited every year. Now we're at 700. The market is strained. We're developing a number of network schools. We're working together with ENEDIS to really try to inspire the young generation to look towards these new professions. And then the third area is the financial side. We always have to put things into proportion here. We're looking at reasonable levels, but we also have to be able to transfer usage. We have to electrify previous fossil fuel sources. We've got to make sure that we move forward, surely. So from the administrative side, do you feel that people are making life easier? The APA law is quite interesting in relation to renewables, and it's the current kind of prism, because there's a lot of acceleration on farms, for example. So we're not benefiting from the overall levers for simplification. There's a kind of hiatus between projects which will develop more quickly and an infrastructure which will we won't be able to benefit. We're currently working together with ENEDIS on administration, see if we can't obtain simplification levers. We're working on the basis that we have to be able to work in proportion to the structures. We don't necessarily need the same types of authorizations depending on the amount of cable that we need. So I'm trying to thank you. I'm trying to avoid using too many acronyms. The translator thanks you. So the prefect will validate the amounts, but for each of these projects, we're going to be looking at a justification from the administrative organization. So there's a kind of series of levels of authorization. We need an application which is proportionate in terms of the permit level. We're working on this. We have costs for administration, and we have codes as well. It's quite complex because we can't expect acceptability on the part of the territories without consulting people. People have things to say about this, and this really can slow things down. So the means that are already mobilized are really match the kind of challenges that we're faced today and tomorrow. I agree totally with what Rachid was saying about the need to animate the whole industrial sector so that we can really raise these challenges, meet these challenges together in the short time available. We also have to convince our partners that there is a need and there is a demand. So meaning the subcontractors, the equipment providers, the public distribution centers, which are suffering over the last 2 years from a lack of products. And we have to convince people to take the risk of building a factory to produce these stations. This is something which is going to be durable. It's going to be going on over time. So I think everybody has to mobilize to make sure that the industrial network is really up to the demand. And as you said in your question, this also makes it necessary to recruit the technicians who are trained, who are interested and motivated by this adventure. With the network school, which was launched this year, there are 50 professional lycées, high schools that are working together with us. They're going to be training technicians for the networks of tomorrow. And ENEDIS in 2023 had 2,900 jobs that were recruited, which is an exceptional level, which shows the extent to which the sector is recruiting today in renewables. And we need these new skills. So if you don't know what to, we have 2 companies who are looking for job seekers. So I just wanted to support the point about the industrial challenge. This is something which we will be lacking in the whole process of transition. But on the issue related to networks, it's even more important. So this is a point which is major. Also in terms of planning, one word we haven't pronounced here is that when we look at things closely, we can say that we're in the process, little by little, of shifting from a policy of the offering, i.e., so I make my supply more reliable, I look at my portfolio, and after a certain point, decisions can be made in joint consultation with the different structures, and then I set up these structures in such and such a place with all the information that I've crossed. I think this is what is going to be happening. If we look now at what's happening on the offshore turbines, this is the trend that we're observing. But in working together with the different sectors, if things are built properly, if we maintain transparency in terms of the resources, this will be the same thing for ground-based wind turbines. But once again, we have this question of anticipation which comes in. So the word But the change, the paradigm shift that we're talking about is necessary so that we're able, now that we have existing infrastructures, we're now able to accelerate for future situations based on the offer. So we have regional schemes, which are part of which are your roadmap. We also have 10-year schemes for the development of the network. What's the kind of hierarchy of these schemes? The 10-year plan for the development of networks is our roadmap. This at ACACIA, in 2019, we brought one out. And we're beginning one at the beginning of 2024. And when we establish these schemes, we're not just talking about offshore, we're talking about ground-based schemes, we're talking about public transport renewal. We've had waves of the development of the network with nuclear plants. It's not like the Eiffel Tower. It has a certain lifespan, and these networks need to be renewed. With these 10-year schemes, we have the main orientations. Obviously, we keep close to the ONR scheme of the S3RNR renewable scheme based on the source, the resources and the networks. So we connect on one side, and then we move from the production centers to the consumption centers. This is RTE's work, and the industrial sector is part of this scheme. So we're moving now slowly towards the ways in which we can speed up the process. But before that, I'd like to turn to Michel GIORIA for the empowering question. But it's not a question, it's not such a silly question ultimately, because when you want to set up a wind turbine farm, where there's one existing, or what are the rules for empowering in France? Can we, for repowering, sorry, can we use a lot more, get a lot more power with a lot fewer wind turbines?
On this repowering question, what can we say? It's a major stake because today we have about 21 gigawatts of wind in France and inland, and we imagine by 2030, 2035 we'll have between 8 and 12 gigawatts that will be part of a structured approach of restructuring. It's a major issue for the capacities that we have. Today, the way the repowering works is that if you make a substantial change above 10% of the power and the size, you must declare and ask for new authorization. If you're below 10%, it's a more simple authorization, so quicker to obtain. So this is the legal situation that we're in. I take the park and I want to repower it, and I try to limit it at 10%. It raises two issues. The first one, it's an industrial problem because structurally France is characterized by the fact that the wind farms installed in France are structurally smaller than the average of what we can see in the EU and in the world. So, which means that they need to keep some production lines that are adjusted. The people who make turbines adjusted to the French market, and it's something that gradually is going to stop. We have to be aware of that. While they're smaller than anywhere else, because for a number of constraints, diversity, aeronautics, some economic incentives as well. So all that together means that it's smaller. So we need to change that. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in a situation when the producers are going to want to order some wind turbines for certain sites. The turbine makers, manufacturers, will not manufacture those turbines any longer, and will have to tackle an issue that is difficult, which is to turn to the Chinese to have some turbines. And this is a real industrial subject. The second subject, we need power, but we also need megawatts per hour, because that's what we need at the end of the day. So if today you replace a wind turbine of 2 megawatts by a wind turbine of 2.2, 2.3, and not by 4 megawatts, while the site will allow it, the production that you have at the end of the day is less. And at a moment where we try to electrify our uses and we have a growth of the energy consumption, I think we're at about 605 terawatts per hour, according to the latest forecast for 2030, 2035. We need to use the repowering to do that. Last point, but not the least, we've learned over the last years that in some places the over-localization of wind projects, and it's going to be the same for PV projects, is raising a lot of resistance. So to mitigate that political pressure, repowering is interesting because we can say, for example, in the Somme region, when I renew a park, I could do minus 25% less posts and for more powers. So it's more accessible. So it means that when you place a park that would do 12 megawatts, to buy a park that could do 22, 23, thanks to the repowering, this has an impact on the grid because it's not the same power that is connected. And we need to integrate that in our scenarios and in our planning approach, whether they are the S3R, ENR, this regional scheme that we were mentioning, or other schemes. Can I say something? We're already at this crossing point because we already have this French-only difficulty with getting pressure. My department is in charge of buying wind farms, so we have a constraint, and we can see that worldwide people are turning to bigger parks, and in France we have our constraints, and that means that it's very long to have an authorization for a wind turbine. When we obtain it, sometimes we cannot transform it. So this is another thing to take into account for the transition. If you have questions, I'm going to turn to the room. If you have questions before we move on to the next subject, does anybody want to ask a question in the front row and gentlemen behind? Okay, well, you have a mic. There's a mic coming your way.
Au premier rang, ici. Madame d'abord. Est-ce qu'il y aura d'autres questions dans la salle que je sache un peu où on s'en est?
So let me see who else wants to ask a question in the room so I know what to expect. Thank you. Thank you for this presentation to all of you. It gives us a very good overview of a complex situation. We exposed very well this decentralization movement that changes the morphology of the network. Its shape is changing with some challenges of phasing between knowing the field and all the works in the network. All of this is being done as a modernization gesture with a mix of families of projects, with the major units, but also all the smaller projects. The question that I have, half of the power today connected is being done by small projects, and tomorrow half of the ENR, the renewables, are going to be of a different category. What is going to happen with the economic model for the low-tension network? Is it part of that regional scheme, S3R? Because there's some regions where integrating those small projects and those low tension projects is going to be limiting. So how do we imagine our economic model for this segment of the network? Is it part of your reflections within this regional scheme? The development and modernization of the low-tension network is a high stake, because the regional scheme is only for what we call the mutualized works, which is the stations and their connection to the transport network. Everything that is low-tension network, it is financed throughout the rates. That is called the TURP, another acronym, TURP, and the rate is paying us on the investment. It's not only ENEDIS who invests in low-tension networks. There are some other players, and the renewal or the development of low-tension network is done naturally, and it actually goes much faster than the other structuring work, such as the ones part of the scheme, and they don't present any particular difficulty. We can connect automatically most of the PV installations, because PV is being connected as an auto-consumption, and it's connected on houses, on roofs, so the connection is there, and we just have to place our panels so it can be connected. And ENEDIS, with just a teleoperation of the meter, the electric meter, can switch the meter from consumption to production mode. So it's done, it's very, very simple. It doesn't mean that the addition of all these small installations does not require to reinforce the infrastructures. So that's why we integrate in our overall development all the addition of all these small installations. Otherwise, the network will be congested, which is to be avoided at all costs. The question, and he can introduce himself because he's well known, Philippe Malbranche, Actionnaire Action. We talk about acceleration. It can be done by the number of installation or the individual power of installation. If we look at the roof, PVs on the roof, the average power is 4 kilowatts. In Germany, it's between 9 and 10. And there's a measure that could be very simple, is that ENEDIS lifts its barrier of 6 kilowatts, because you can buy energy up to 12 kilowatts in the connection. And for the re-injection, we're limited to 6 kV. So it could be a very simple measure to increase the average power of the installations in residential roofs. And it will also allow to decrease the cost of the installation, because we'd intervene not to install 3 kilowatts, but 8, 9, or 10. So, and it will also address the growing need. So it would just follow the regulation that the other countries have. Why do we have such a limit in France? Another question for you. It's a technical limitation for a monophase connection. And for the other one, you need a triple phase connection. Why do we need that? Because we need to balance the phase of the network. Otherwise, if the network is imbalanced, there will be some problems with the quality and the supply. So it's a technical limitation that we have, depending on the power that we need to move to the triple phase network, particularly if we have users such as heat pumps or electrical cars. We'll need to go triple phase. So you're saying that our houses are badly connected? They're not connected at all. It was sized for the needs of a particular time, but we're moving into a new phase of electrification of the country, and gradually we'll probably have to adjust our electrical connections for the individuals if the use is required. It's part of the evolution of the network and the grid. So we had a question on, hello, Jean-Louis Repetto of Net Salaire. I saw in the new plant a declaration of Madame Megnaud, the president of ENEDIS, who said that because of all that we're talking about now, ENEDIS was going to build 80 substations by 2030. So it's one a month. So I would say, of course, it's not impossible, but it seems like a big task. Can you tell us more about it? Do you have an acceleration plan for the building of those substations? Is it
Non, alors là, très clairement, c'est notre enjeu commun avec RTE d'accélérer.
So I'm working with RT to accelerate the building of those stations and to connect them to the transport network. In our roadmap, we have a visibility on the number of stations that need to be connected. The challenge is to be able to standardize this, to adjust our resources, our investments to this challenge, so all the stations don't arrive at the same moment. So we have a consultation with RTE so we can smooth this out, and we're not at the right pace right now. So of course we're not connecting one station per month, it's correct, but we should get to that goal. And if you look at the scheme that are published, you will easily identify the stations that need to be built to connect the renewables. I can take two more questions, but we're going to have to go for very short questions and very short answers. There's a gentleman who raised his hand for quite a while. Short answer, short question, short answer. You used the word simplification 4 times, and I would like to know what you're thinking about the segmentation of EDF that would control everything, and now we have RTE, ENEDIS, that share the work. Does that rhyme with simplification? Rachid OTMANI, do you want to take that one? We have exogenous constraints. The market is opening up, so I don't really want to get into the debate of for or against. That was a short answer. Hello, I have a question on the private stations. We saw a trend from the developers because there's not enough capacity on middle tension to reach for capacity on high tension. So we see a number of developers who connect their renewables stations. I think you're doing a spoiler for the next round subjects. There's some private developers, private actors. Is there a point for them to help the managers of the network? And how do you think this is going to be a tool to accelerate the transition and the connection? So we're going to answer your question in the next session. It was actually my question. So wait for a few minutes and you'll hear your question being discussed in the next session. Not to be late for the next generation in terms of energy storage, shouldn't we invest in storage that is broken down rather than in different places, rather than investing it just in the network? Because in Germany, for example, I know one supplier, it's 20 kilos per battery per month. So in case of a storm, it could be interesting.
Peut-être contrairement aux idées reçues, le stockage se développe énormément.
You don't know it, but storage is growing in France. We have a few batteries in PV kits and in individual houses, but it's not what really constitutes the storage capacity. At ENEDIS, we have hundreds of batteries of 1 megawatt, and we store them, and it's all over, the distribution network, and it's about 400 megawatts already, and we're going to double that capacity next year. So today we already have a park of batteries that is probably not enough, but it's already substantial. Rachid OTMANI, I would like to say something else on the number. Hervé mentioned it today. On the public transport system, we have 3 gigawatts, 3.5 gigawatts clients who made requests, and we have 20 gigawatts that are being instructed. So to go back to the maturity question, I think that the business plans at 21 gigawatts of storage are rare, and it's not about PV storage, it's batteries that are going to be connected to the transport system. I think some markets are dreaming about capacities to manage the network. There's a whole subject on storage. It brings services. We imagine that you need 6 gigawatts of flexibility by 2035. When you receive 21 as a request, you mention that it's rational. But you're the boss, aren't you? So you're going to say yes or no. Well, I offer an access to anyone who wants to connect to that network. So, but all the question of land use but I think everybody's getting very excited about the storage right now. Thank you.
Julien ISAMBERT, on arrive sur votre projet et puis sur cette question justement.
Julien ISAMBERT, we're going to get to the question of the private stations that the gentleman who asked the question was asking about. Did you have a PowerPoint presentation that you wanted to show us? But could we, well, now that everybody understands how the grid works, in your case, yes, I know you need to show us the presentation. So, a private substation of connection, private substation, what is that about? So, yes, we try ourselves as well to do our part. And when we connect installations on the public transport system with the RTE, we can put in place a multi-producer grouping, so have several installations that belong to several project leaders on the same transformation substation. So you can connect by different wires, different installations of renewables production on the same transformation substation that is connected to RTE. And this model, I believed in this model for a while, and in 2018 we made a request for connection with RTE, and that was commissioned at the end of 2020. So over the last 2.5 years, we created this connection point, and we created 200 megawatts of capacity in this transport network for several developers of wind farms who are now co-owners of this installation of connection to the network. And why do I take this model? Because we had to work relentlessly with several stakeholders, the collectivities, the project leaders, the RTE, of course, find consensus, compromises on a daily basis, find contracts. But at the end of the day, we were able to manage the projects, manage the risk as well. And this time management as well that was optimized, because in less than 3 years, we did it. And even in 2020, we had a bit of a pandemic, so that slowed it down for a few months. But we were capable to put in place the development and to offer a shared connection. So that also allows us to share the risk and to optimize the project. So there are different tools, several tools that are offered to renewables to connect to the grid, and we should not go against what is done by the local authorities. The advantage is to share the risk and to share the financing of the project as well between the various actors to find a compromise. And that allowed for this acceleration of the connection in a specific geographic area. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Why did a private substation is helping everybody to go faster? Well, as Rachid said it earlier on, there are some under optimization, to say the word, that are made compulsory for the creation of public works. We talked about some economical reasons or that going to come on top of justification of public works throughout the national scheme. It's kind of a lot of paperwork, and it's true for the connection of the renewables, but it's also true with the connection of any other installation. We are not complying to the same administrative requirements. This way of thinking on optimization of the authorizations for the public managers is also something to need to do. Rachid OTMANI, we need to leave it up to the private sector to go faster and to build the stations. The question is not to leave it up to the private sector or not. I believe that the first warning is in very specific areas. And the second subject is the acceptability. If we build a renewable station and there's another one next door, it's not going to be making people happy. So we try to plan and map out, because we try to have an optimal result from a technical and social point of view. But there's also a question of sensitivity of the regions. We cannot multiply stations in certain areas. We're not opposed to it, because we opened the multi-producer grouping to allow some producers, if they want to mutualize their cost, to be able to group among each other. And in the law, we introduced in this planification scheme, if there's no network that is there, and if an actor wants to develop an infrastructure without waiting, we let him the opportunity to do so. He will pay all of the costs. He will not benefit from the pooling effect. But the first subject for me regarding the private stations is how they're going to be accepted in the regions, because it's going to work a few times, but then it could backlash. Before I ask you the question, Julien ISAMBERT, did you have anybody opposing the construction of the station? No, we didn't on this project or others, but on other projects or other geographical sectors, we found solutions with the managers of public networks like ENEDIS, who in collaboration with the local authorities, they created a public station which was relocated in a different geographic area. So, but we stayed in line with the initial program to find the best solution with the local authorities. Thank you. Julien, do you want to say a word? The first one, Michel, sorry, is very clear. We are at a transformation point of the system, and there are some key ingredients for this transformation. The first one is the transparency of the fields. Transparency of the field that are very important, particularly to revise this S3R ENR, transforming the regulation to go from a regulation that will allow us to anticipate the works and the studies linked to the works. So it is key, in my view, before we find the alternative routes is that all of the actors focus on the success of these two major steps. And that will allow further down the road to reach the plateau of acceleration that we mentioned earlier on. On the question of acceptability, during the last round session, we raised a point. Well, the last round table was on the acceleration. One point was raised with the essential is the way we built the acceleration of renewables. It must be part of the history in the country that we are, in the anthropology of the country that we live in. And we should not underestimate this point, which means that, if I can say it that way, there's a French flaw that makes us not do that. And we take our share of it as representing of FR, sorry. We look at Greece, Spain, Portugal, and say, oh, let's do that in France. But we very quickly reach some limits, versus if we took the situation the other way around and say, how does France works in terms of networks? What is the situation of its electricity system? And we build something that is adjusted to the local context. We would have built a very different narrative, and the situation would be much better. So on the question on the private stations, we should not make the same mistake that we made on other topics, and that we look at the anthropology of the French electricity grid, and that we push the right levers to accelerate the transition. So you're not in favor of private stations, is what I'm reading between the lines. Yes, you're absolutely right. We should not underestimate the cultural aspect of the country. We need to adjust to many actors in many markets. There's a question of adaptation of the culture in which we invest. And when we build renewables in France, we need to make that effort. It is key. I'll give you a very simple example. If we had built the narrative of renewables on reduction of fossil fuels rather as opposing nuclear, would have saved 10 years. Would have gained 10 years. It is clear, crystal clear. We can think whatever we want about nuclear and renewables, but at the end of the day, the point is to bring down fossil fuels, fossil energies. If we had said that at the time, at the beginning of 2010, in the law of 2015, would not have had the presidential campaign that we had in 2022, the regional campaign that we had in 2021, and we wouldn't have had the difficulties at the Parliament on the acceleration law of renewables. So for private stations, we should not make the same mistake. Otherwise, it's going to happen again. I am sure of that. Julien ISAMBERT, I think you have the right to answer.
Yeah. As I said, it's true that a connection to the transport network, like connecting to the distribution networks, there are projects which are not solid. I'm still convinced that there are various levers that can be activated for connection. And also to putting into service the renewables. Rather than opposing different systems, there are certain geographical areas which don't pose any problems, where we are successful in the projects on the basis of the local community. As long as there's no opposition, I think that the problem doesn't really arise. So do you have other projects of this type? Are there many of them? Today, ACACIA is focused on the development of storage installations for various reasons that have already been referred to here, the different synergies. We were talking about power, for example, but we talked about storage. We can also talk about energy, and it's the energy side which is produced and consumed, which is important. We have different issues today to set up synergies on the storage projects that we're developing. Once again, we are adhering to the regulations and to the common interest. Can you say a little bit more about these private substations? If they're authorized, will this present a problem or not that much? It's a debate, a real debate, because we're in a phase where the system is in transition. It's looking for answers. We're shifting from a public network, which is very, very structured, and now we're transitioning towards another type of balance. And this transition takes place with a phase where we actually are looking for a collective optimum. The development of these private substations shouldn't normally come in competition to the public resources. We have to make sure that these private substations are connected to the transport system, but with simple rules, easy to understand, with private customer substations, but the medium and large size projects have to be supplied differently. We mustn't have a debate between public and private in this area. It's a question of a deadline. I put myself in the position of the design offices, for example. It's obvious for them that when there's a deadline to meet, a choice has to be made, which may imply grouping together some of the projects. There are cases which go in a different direction. We have farms, for example, energy farms, which are broken up into sections, which is not necessarily a good thing either, to have this type of connection. The reason is that if we allow this type of network to develop, it will destructure the balance. It will create imbalance, and this will be more expensive for the. So, what you mean? Why if we cut up the energy farms? Well, they're very, very big energy farms to maintain the balance from an energy point of view, have to stay connected to the transport networks. So it's really a question of having public incentive that reflect the collective costs and interests. Now we're in a phase where we're kind of looking for answers, and perhaps these economic systems are not well adapted to the world today. Victor? Yes, we understand. And perhaps the cursor for economic indicators and ad hoc costs with the sharing of the funding of this transition, all this has to be looked at by adapting to the current situation. Why do certain producers select private substations? It takes about 3 years for a project to see the light of day. When we're looking at the public sector, it's much longer, in 6 years, 6 or 7 years. And this is also why, as developers, sometimes we go towards quicker solutions. It's not necessarily what we're seeking, but we want to concentrate on the development side. Yes, but I completely understand the dilemma in this type of choice, to the extent that it's legal to, and this doesn't enter into competition with the collective interest. It's important to, from an administrative point of view, it's important to streamline some of the processes because they're far too heavy at the moment, and so that we can reduce the development time for public development.
opération de piratage non plus. Donc,
We're not talking about pirating or, you know.
on va aborder notre dernière
So we're going to move on to our final sequence here. So Victor DANEL, keep your mic. So we're looking at mixed connection. Mr. DANEL is going to make a presentation. I heated the room here, raise the temperature. It's going to go further,
Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un raccordement
higher up.
mixte?
So what are we when we're talking about a mixed connection? You decided to start by showing us what you're doing in other countries because, as you said, you are a group that works pretty much everywhere. Yes, I don't want to contradict what Michel said. We have been inspired by what's happening in other countries, and the managers develop their systems differently according to the different countries. But we wanted to look at what's possible and acceptable abroad. So I have two projects to present to you here. The one at Berge Speech in Germany. It's a project which took place in 2014.
On peut changer de place si vous voulez.
If you like, we can switch places. So in 2014, 24 megawatts we're talking about with a connection to the public distribution network of 24 megawatts. With this, in 2020, we added a 10 megawatt capacity from a PV park. We didn't do this to reduce the size of the cable, but we wanted to simply add an automaton which made sure that the production never exceeded 24 megawatts. I wanted to talk to you another project in the Netherlands with floating solar panels. We are one of the pioneers of this type of device. And if you like, yes, okay, I'm doing a bit of advertising here, but this was 21.6 megawatts. It was put into service. It was commissioned in 2021. And we then commissioned a floating PV park of 3.4 megawatts. And more recently, we added 15.2 megawatts of battery. Noted battery didn't exist, the batteries only come into play at a certain level of power production. So it never produces more than 21.6 megawatts. So this may, for us as producers and developers who pay 75% of our access to the network, it seemed important to be able to use this connection in an optimum manner. Thank you very much. So in France, did you do the same thing? Well, in France, we can't reason in the same way. We can't. We wouldn't have been able to make this connection. We would have to have set up a connection of 45.6 megawatts. So, however, we played the game with the Federation. We exchange regularly with RTE and ENEDIS, with the Energy Regulation Commission, which is the kind of policeman of the organization. We set up a sandbox system and to look at the possibility of to be able to use innovative connections. We were involved in the 2021 session where we requested the authorization to use a 12 megawatt pipe, which was agreed. The situation today with this derogation, we obtained PV authorization. But unfortunately, as like many projects, we're still waiting for authorization, so we can't finalize this system for the time being. As professional developers, it's important to show the administration the interest of what we're doing so that we can look at the various thresholds. Maybe there's a point that you didn't raise, but maybe everybody knows this. Why can we connect PV and wind turbines on the same pipe? Because it's a natural fusion. In France, for example, when we connect to an ENEDIS distribution network, we buy the connecting capacity, which refers to the nominal amount with a maximum of their capacities. We know that a wind turbine farm rarely works at full tilt, and more rarely, this is very rare for the cable to be working at full capacity. And we can see that there's a natural expansion or overrun, which makes it possible to optimize the connection that we partly financed. So there's space left in the pipe. Can we do the same thing in France? And what are the limits that we faced to put an installation in the same pipe? In simple terms, there's no difficulty in principle using this same pipe to put PV and wind turbines. We sized our cables so that we would declare, so that the project leader was able to declare the use of the pipe as well as the duration. And we will propose a cable which optimizes the cost for the local authority, including loss over time, because of this related to this section of the cable. So this would the section would correspond to the optimum for the collective good. So between the transport and distribution networks, there is a distinction, and this is where a number of issues, projects are trying to optimize their connection on the distribution network so that they don't have to connect to the transport network. This is a basic issue. We're looking for answers here because it really raises the question again in terms of the limits that were laid down 15 years ago, which have been raised from 12 to 17 megawatts. Is this the collective optimum? I don't have the answer to that question, but all these debates have to really mean that we question ourselves as a group as to the right threshold to define, to naturally direct the projects between transport and distribution. A question on this point. A quick question, please. Can you hear me? Just to come back to what BAYWA was saying, so now I'm the technical director of Sonaire. We've already done this. We did this mixed connection with the study of overflow in the north with Boralex, which was the operator of the substation in question. And in fact, we were working with a 50 mega cable connection with accumulated potential power of 77 with future turbines to be added. And this was done, this was carried out in close collaboration with RTE, indirectly, because we did it on the HTA side for this particular substation, but this substation is then connected in HTB. So this is possible in France. Sergi did it as well, but they're perhaps better connected. But it can be done in terms of a constructive discussion about specifications, the possibilities of. So, sorry, in French, the capacity. It's a rather an ambiguous title in French, so they asked for clarification. So we were looking at regulation in the COS. This is established by the PMAX. So I think you're going to have to stop because we're going to be completely lost in your terms here. So. And in fact, we're looking at an overflow situation, which is interesting. We're looking at loss deviations of 1.3%, which is modest, really, for photo PV. Sorry, these technical terms are not always easy to follow. So thank you very much for your testimony. I can see the people are leaving, so we're going to have to stop. We're at the end of our round table. A final question. Does this represent a lot? Is this going to add a lot to the existing power level? I think there are a lot of saturated substations in the north and the east. We could add on power from PVs at a cheaper rate, and this might be a solution. I think the idea is to quickly add energy, clean energy, and that we move towards electrification. What do you think? Could this be a potential to have a mixed system? Well, without talking about mixed connections, we have technical regulations to take into account the fusioning or the combined use of PV and turbine. And this means we can put more PVs where there are turbines and vice versa. And we're also trying to anticipate these natural developments and our ways of sizing the projects based on the existing network. Would anybody like to add anything? Otherwise, I'm going to bring this session to a close. Thank you very much. Thank all 5 of you for your talents as speakers. And I hope you enjoy your lunch. We're back here for green hydrogen in the same room.